Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. I would like to take a moment and apologize to the original viewers of this video as the audio issues caused by the upload to YouTube created several glitches to the sound quality. I believed this was due somehow to an inconsistent frame rate that, while my computer is capable of playing the original with no issue, YouTube's systems were unable to parse the data properly. Now, it's no secret in recent weeks that I've dealt with numerous issues involving DMCAs and those attempting to silence criticism in order to defend their own wallets. The number of people out there that would gladly run over an honest games critic with a train multiple times in order to further their own nefarious ends are legion. It is because of this that I refuse to bow to pressures from amoral developers and stand up for both myself and for what I believe in. Now, my troubles started with what feels like an eternity ago, even though it's been a little over a month, with Dentola Studios. I had released a video very similar to my still as yet to be permanently named Asset Flipper series, in which I had found a quote-unquote developer that had purchased a series of Unity Store assets and then had posted them onto Steam's Greenlight system unaltered and unedited in any way, except of course to change the name. Dentola Studios, or Jaff Stook as he's now calling himself on the Steam Greenlight system now, engaged in every underhanded, scummy, and despicable behavior that one would expect from someone with no morals and no sense of decency. He continued to engage in mass comment and discussion thread deletion in order to remove any visible form of negative criticism. He also changed his name on the storefront in order to render the links posted in my video useless no less than 4 times. Finally, after I had changed the links to make use of the unchangeable numerical value for his page, he resorted to the last desperate act of the truly and pristinely idiotic and issued a DMCA strike on my video. And through this, I learned not once but twice in recent weeks that the Streisand effect is a powerful thing. First with Dentola Studios, and then a short while later with Doki, one of the developers for the game Fur Fun, a substandard ukulele clone that was picked up by Spanish YouTuber Dallas Review, or Dallas Games, this is more than one channel. Now, this disgusting troll of a YouTuber is famous for his exceptionally toxic behavior and absolute idiocy. Somehow, that appeals to a certain subset of Spaniards. Perhaps I should move there. I could create utter nonsense in no time and become famous in a few weeks. Regardless, Doki and Dallas have been issuing false DMCA strikes to multiple channels, mine included. And these, for the most part, would have been fairly minor issues. A few hundred to maybe 1,000 people would have seen them, and life would have moved on. However, since these fine examples of the modern education system learn, when you attempt to silence fair and appropriate criticism, people are going to yell loudly, and YouTubers especially will band together to raise awareness and make sure that those doing the silencing are brought into as large of a spotlight as one can manage. And there's a very good reason for doing that. Gamers, as a group, don't like developers attempting to silence critics, especially YouTube critics. Most understand that we are much the same as them. People with a passion for video games. We just happen to have a microphone and a camera sitting on our desks. To silence critics are to deliberately remove information from the public eye, and that is something that the public will most definitely not thank you for. And while shining a giant spotlight on these developers brings them more attention than they deserve, it also calls attention to them in such a way that no one in their right mind would ever want to purchase their games. Unless you're Nintendo, then you get a pass because of the nostalgia factor for some reason. However, recently we've had an odd twist in this little drama dance that we've all learned the steps to very well in recent days. An indie developer has had a DMCA strike placed on their game, and the game subsequently pulled from the Steam storefront. And while the Steam user that had claimed credit for the DMCA, as it turned out, was in fact lying, the DMCA was issued by GFI, who had in the past worked with the developer of Syrian Warfare. I still felt this warranted a discussion as to the how and the why. This speaks to a troubling mindset within certain subcultures of gaming that I find myself very much on the opposite side of the fence. On February 27th, Syrian Warfare, an RTS game, was launched onto Steam, and it had achieved a very positive ranking before it was pulled. It is a strategy game surrounding the Syrian conflict, and the controversial nature was not lost on some. Entertainment media has always had a tricky task of portraying real-life events. When they evolve a war or some such tragic or terrible event, it is very much up to the creators of that form of entertainment to treat it with the proper dignity and respect that it deserves. The reason being is that people actually lived through it. A case in point, the attack on Pearl Harbor would be the most well-known Western example of just such a phenomenon. a day that will live in infamy, as it was called. And many have adapted that horrific day to video games and movies in the past to varying degrees of success. In fact, the entire World War II time period has become highly dramatized in books, in movies, in comics, and in games. Some were wonderfully well done pieces, and others, like Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor, not so much. But it is that responsibility to events like wars that cannot be tossed aside with a cavalier attitude as people have lived what you are portraying in fiction. In the case of the Syrian War, it is very much happening right now. These are not historical events being played out. This is an ongoing conflict that is affecting lives every day. Now, one Steam user posted the following 6 days before the game was pulled from Steam. I am horrified to see this game. This is one of our world's worst acts of humanity as a country is destroyed and so many lives lost and families displaced. Anyone who understands what happened would puke when seeing this game. Please don't make a horrific moment of history into a game so soon when the wounds are fresh. And while I will always be one for supporting a person's right to express their opinions, this strikes at the core as to what happened to this game. This user, who was identified in other publications as Zoltan, claimed credit for issuing a DMCA on the game based on their belief that this game should not exist because of the ongoing conflict in Syria. Now, I have been mulling this conundrum over in my head for a few days now. You see, one of the voice actors involved in the game reached out to me as soon as the DMCA occurred. As I wasn't able to get any details and the developer had not responded to my emails, I was unable to gather enough information at that time to be able to adequately form an opinion. But I'm reminded of the game Hatred, a game that was based on the premise that the character being played is a homicidal maniac, and you, the player, are expected to go around slaughtering people in a hail of gunfire, lasting as long as you can before getting gunned down by the police. People were up in arms over that game, again based on their own defined sense of morality, and many stated that the game should not be allowed to exist. I was one of the few YouTubers out there that argued for Hatred's right to exist, and that if people didn't like it, they should be allowed to vote with their wallets and simply not purchase the game. Now, I myself did purchase the game and gave it a try. I found it to be a fairly standard top-down shooter with nothing really to make it stand out. That game currently sits at a very positive rating on Steam with over 3,500 reviews, so some people, a fair amount of people, actually liked the game more than I did. But it was nowhere near as vile and evil as people had made it out to be. Now, I also noticed that most of the detractors for the game Hatred were objecting to it on premise alone and had not even bothered to give the game a try and see what it was like for themselves. And here we are again with more activist-minded individuals like Zoltan out there that feels they know better than everyone else. That their morals and understanding of the world is somehow superior to everyone else's. Now, I've seen their type before and it never ends well, much as things are not going to end well here now for Syrian Warfare. A person who very much admitted in their own discussion thread that they had not even given the game a try to see how the current Syrian conflict is being portrayed, and that they have absolutely no desire to. Driven by their own code of ethics, Zoltan, actually it was the company GFI, but Zoltan is claiming credit for their actions, issued a DMCA strike on the game. Zoltan very much glommed onto this opportunity to spread their own narrative in order to make themselves feel better, in order to bemoan and silence a game that covered a topic that they did not want to have covered, in order to silence a game and attempt to prevent its mere existence because the thought of it being out there in the world was so abhorrent, so anathema to them that they would apparently say or do anything to push their own narrative. Some have argued that the game was Russian propaganda, and to that I would answer back with, how many Call of Duty or Battlefield games have we had that have been American propaganda? How many other games out there could be classified as American propaganda that have still been played the world over? I remember Command & Conquer Generals had the GLA, which was a Middle Eastern terrorist organization, and that game was released directly on the coattails of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And yet all of these games have been played in countless countries. So I don't buy the line about the game being propaganda. Why? Because no one in their right mind that I can think of would honestly care. The thing that would affect gamers would be if the game were bad. Many would still argue that the game is in poor taste since the conflict is ongoing, and that the game's existence would be deemed insensitive. And I would have to argue against that wholeheartedly. Now, without having played the game, I have no way of knowing whether or not the game merely uses a known conflict as a backdrop, or if there is a story there that it is trying to relate, but even if it were highly insensitive, I would still argue vehemently for its right to exist. Now, by what right does one person dictate the standards of the entire gaming community? By what right does this person sit in moral judgment over a video game in such a way? By what right does this person honestly feel they have anything to say in regards to this whatsoever, let alone take it upon themselves to issue a DMCA strike on a games developer who has committed a crime no more heinous than simply producing what appears to be a worthwhile game? Now, this DMCA, which was issued by GFI and not this Zoltan person, as he would like you to believe, was still ultimately unlawful. It is unjust, and it is as morally and ethically shallow as it is the outright censorship of a game. And while censorship in the name of morality has been in existence for longer than anyone can remember, it was no more right the first time it was attempted than it is here and now. Censorship for one's own morality over another's is every bit as wrong as censorship to hide from the truth. It is disgusting, it is horrible, and it churns my stomach more than a game about an ongoing war ever could. And while this turned out to be a DMCA strike from another company and they have reportedly agreed to lift the DMCA, what this Zoltan claimed to do and what they were willing to do is not changed. It is still completely abhorrent to me and is anathema to free speech and everything that it stands for. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. I am highly interested in your opinions. Now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.